Welcome to the PR Essential Summit series, Newsjacking and Keeping Your Brand Visible in a Recession, and episode 120.
Welcome to the PR Playbook Podcast, the only podcast giving you actionable skills and advice you need to execute a strategic PR program. Warning: what you hear next may lead to brand awareness and increased sales and customer exposure. Now here's your host, Rinjini Joshua.
We are back with PR Essential Summit. I know you guys love it by now. We are on silvertelegram.com/PR Essential Summit 2022 with hyphens inside if you guys want to get all the content on demand. In this episode, we're talking newsjacking and keeping your brand visible in a recession, which I know is top of mind for a lot of people. And it's really not that difficult to do. It's about being noisy. And I am joined by Mary Elizabeth Elkordy from Elkordy Global Strategies, or like a PR agency / media agency. And we just kind of talk about some of the latest trends in the media and PR and what you can do to keep your brand visible, how you can newsjack and what that means. And yeah, I think you guys will enjoy this conversation and learn a little bit about how you can piggyback on trending news. I hope you enjoyed this episode and talk to you next time. Good morning. We are here for the session, Keeping Your Brand Visible in a Recession. Oh, we're going to let me see if I can get this screen sharing going. Aside from that, we are here for Keeping Your Brand Visible in a Recession. Today, I'm talking with Mary Elizabeth Elkordy. She's the president and founder of Elkordy Global Strategies. I would say communications agency or PR agency. Mary, say hello and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Mary Elizabeth. Nice to meet everyone. I run a company called Elkordy Global Strategies. We are a full service PR firm and we've been around almost 3 years. We started in the pandemic, so we definitely understand the topic and issues that people are facing right now. And as we are changing and evolving, some of the new things that people need to consider moving forward.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the most interesting things about you. I think you guys have like a really nice host of like former journalists that are part of your team. And we connected because you guys do a lot of really great pitching work as far as it goes to newsjacking. We've kind of talked about that rapid response, which is basically responding to what's happening in the news and picking up on trends. And so I think, obviously emerging from COVID, you guys had probably a lot of experience on piggybacking on a lot of the COVID topics. So I'd love to start with maybe talking about a little bit more about like the newsjacking process or the rapid response process and how you guys approach it, but then also how you leveraged it during COVID. And then we'll kind of go into the future from there. So yeah, I guess, can you give us a little bit of background on like just newsjacking, and we could go back and forth. Obviously, we both know what it is, but your perspective on newsjacking and how we've leveraged it or you've leveraged it for PR purposes.
Sure. So newsjacking is just a nice way of saying what we call breaking news trend pitching. So where we identify a story that's happening in the news. So for instance, when FTX crashed, right? If you were someone who's in the crypto space, it would be a perfect time to pitch you about it if you're an expert, because reporters and journalists need to have qualified, credible people quoted in their stories. And so it's a unique way of getting people out there in an authentic way where it's not a one-sided relationship where we're, asking a reporter, trying extremely hard with the reporter for them to care about a new initiative or a product or a company announcement. No, we're offering the thought leader, we're doing some thought leadership pitching on their CEO or their spokesperson to help them also have a credible person to speak in their story. So it's a two-sided relationship. And the benefits of newsjacking is it typically places pretty fast because it is based on news, and news sites move pretty quickly. So when people ask, like, when does something place, that's when I feel confident in staying, in normally less than a week, which I know you and I probably don't feel confident in many things guaranteeing a place, right? But it also adds a lot of credibility, and you get a lot more top tier opportunities out the break, right? Because again, people with the staff for that tend to be the ones that have a larger budget, and those tend to be top tier outlets.
Yeah. So that's it. That's a really good segue into something that we've been having a challenge with. And I'm sure you understand this too, is like, it's so funny that everybody wants to have coverage or media coverage really quickly, but then they're not prepared to offer their support very quickly. So I feel like understanding the dynamics of working with the media might be good in this situation where, when we're talking about deadlines, like what is the sense, why is there a sense of urgency and how should the person be prepared to respond? Because I think, we have that come up a lot.
Well, I think that there are a couple of things. First of all, when a breaking news story happens, usually we try to get to press very quickly, right? Because in the understanding that a lot of deadlines are 6 p.m., or if it happened that night, they're trying to get something in the next day's news cycle. And so understanding that, urgency is imminent, especially with like broadcast, you have to get to a producer ASAP. As someone who used to work in radio and TV, if I don't hear from someone within 30 minutes, I'm moving to someone else. It's very quick. It doesn't mean I won't say no to that person, but I have to keep the options out there because I have a show at this time. My host wants a certain number of guests, and some of the hosts I want several people with,
Right.
credibility. And so there's urgency in terms of that. I think depending on the story, some stories are evolving, right? So if you see a story that's really large, I think, if you miss the boat on the first round, or, we've gotten out there, but we've had time since then to do more, the work with the client to do more research and digging and like really setting like what is that perspective, right? I think it really helps to, if you see like I'll use FTX as an example again, right? It's
Mhm.
just it's such a huge story that has so many reverberations of implications that it's going to keep going out there for a little while. So that's a perfect time to work with your client to prepare them on what their talking points and what their overall stances are as the story evolves. But for something that's like more like last minute, I think as a PR person, or if you have a PR team, it's really like we work in a remote work era. Like the
Yeah.
phone is the office, right? Picking up that phone and calling your client and just going over with them. Like some of our clients get nervous about having too strong of a perspective, or is my perspective strong enough? And someone I work with who's now like an analyst on a really big cable news outlet, before his interviews, we'd always try to figure out like what's the phrase that we're trying to get people to remember,
Right.
right? So you can't get someone to remember everything you say, but if you can get someone to remember, a specific phrase or tagline that really, exudes their credibility, that's really helpful.
So, okay, there's a few things that you mentioned, and yeah, there's a few things that I want to backtrack a little bit. So, first, we talked about like the timing of the news cycle and how quick it can be. But I think it also varies. Like you mentioned, right after that, like okay, maybe some news has longer legs than other news. In a general sense, I guess, from most stuff that you guys do with newsjacking and rapid response, what is like, give me a time frame. Like, what is like, is it 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours? What does that look like?
I mean, really, the second the news hits, our goal is to be out to press within 2 hours.
Oh,
Right.
geez. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, if it's during a normal work day, if it's at night, obviously, the client might not get to us in the morning. Ideally, your client well enough to get a sense of like the idea of the perspective. But, the second a news hits, we reach out to the client saying like, hey, we just saw this. We think you could really add value to this. If you're cool with it, if you could just send us a couple of bullet points of what you're thinking, just for perspective, we can go out to press pretty quickly. Now, is it always 2 hours we get into? No, but that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
Because the sooner you get into that person's mailbox, but as soon as the story hits,
The more
the more
likely.
likely you're going to get an opportunity. And one of the best tools to use, I think, if you have like a lot of clients, is TweetDeck, because you can be able to put all these different feeds of topics, right? And like
Mhm.
Twitter, in some ways, sees the news before the actual news hits online, right? So if you are working with a client that, like, I used to work on the opioid litigation case, right?
Mhm.
You have a client that's, working on like something high profile or high intensity in terms of hashtags or keywords. Being able to have that feed popping up for all the different clients that you have is really helpful in order to just keep track, right? Because in PR, the beautiful thing is we work in every single industry, right?
Mhm.
Now, sometimes if it's a more sensitive thing and the client has like is being looked at by the government or has like more people they need to go through before they go out there,
Yeah.
obviously 2 hours is not going to work, right? So, I mean, but again, it depends on the gravity of the story. Because
So I
the
guess from that
the
perspective, is
sure.
everybody a candidate for this? I mean, maybe not. Like you said, like some
I
of
mean,
the
I
like if you're
think I think everyone's a candidate for it, depending on what they're talking about. I mean, I don't think anyone is not. I think it's also about who your audience is. So sometimes, newsjacking doesn't mean it has to be like something happened in Ukraine or in Iran. It could be something in your industry. Someone influential said something, some new research came out that really either validates what you're saying or adds a moment of pause or clarity for people to consider when they're determining certain decisions. So it doesn't have to be something like earth shattering. I mean, we worked with an engagement insurance company, and when J-Lo got engaged, that was a news story for us, right? Because but it was, right? And it gave us an opportunity to pitch their data and research. And so I think sometimes when people think of newsjacking, they think it has to be like, Trump made some announcement today, Biden, signed same-sex marriage the other day. Like those are obviously crystal clear moments, but there are also some other moments that happen in time where, ghost quitting is such a big trend, right? Where if there's a CEO says something about it, like of Goldman Sachs or something or whatever, that's still news that we can pitch someone to. It just depends on the audience and what does that audience care about. And so in radio, we used to call it the lightning rod effect. What would entice someone to take an action? So for us, our goal is to get callers, right? So that we had more voices and more opinions on the show. But for other people, it could be getting the reporter to be interested in speaking with you, getting someone to look at some bill you're working on, getting someone to buy a product. And so it's just identifying, is it something that you're trying to get someone to do, something that's like a physical action, or having them hear what you're saying and making it sit and ponder with them, that they might talk about it with their friends or family or a significant other. And so those are the things I think about when pitching something.
So okay, so when you do have to do something quickly or fairly quickly, whatever the time frame may be, how do you prepare the executive or the brand? Like, what do you do in preparation so that you guys can kind of do that effectively and really you have to be primed. Like you have to know what you're talking about. And again, you need to know what news to monitor. So what kind of materials do you prepare so that you can actually effectively monitor, engage, do all that part?
I think it's, whenever you're starting a client, it's really understanding that industry, taking that time to do the research, learn about the stories, learn about the key issues, what has been the top stories for the past 90 days before the client even started. Like, are there stories that we think are going to continue to evolve or have implications elsewhere? I think also when we interview a client the first day that we start working with them, we don't just ask them about what they do with their company. We ask about a lot of trending things that are happening so that we start getting a gauge of their thought process, their tone, where they're at on certain issues, because it gives us a sense of also news moments where we feel like the heavy lift of them having to create something from scratch is low, right? Because they already have a stance, they already have an opinion. If it's something where they have none, again, it's really just communicating with your client. It's just calling them, doing a last minute call, putting together some sample questions. If someone's nervous, we can do a run through, and then help tailor it. But typically in a breaking news moment, there isn't always a ton of time to do all the research in the world, but you also have to think about these outlets, right? New York Times, I believe, writes for an 8th grade reading level, right? So their questions can only be so intense. Now, obviously, if you're someone who is, dealing with something that's very highly sensitive, and you yourself, the client, has a sort of reputation that makes it questionable if they should be responding, or that they could get pushback for responding, obviously use common sense, take a pause. Maybe you wait a day or two to talk about it and have a legitimate thing to say. But if it's something where, there's new research coming out and you're a data expert, the likelihood of someone putting a gotcha question to you is significantly low.
Yeah.
Right. So I think also identifying how volatile the news is. And that goes into some crisis PR thinking, right? What's the worst that can happen?
Right.
Right. Like that thinking sometimes, right? Because Mary, that's so negative, but that's our job. That's our job at the end of the day. Sometimes we work with people who want to be controversial, but I still feel the need, when I'm nervous that someone's going to try to do a gotcha question. I'm like, are you sure?
Yeah.
You can, I know you like this, but I want to make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people nothing is off the record. You don't know what's going to happen until you get into that conversation, and then you're unprepared. And then, that's when the gotcha moment happens. And I've had people stumble and kind of look like a ghost at a point where they're should I answer that? Should I not? And then it's so embarrassing if you're the PR person, you have to step in and be like, you don't have to answer that, or hey, we can't answer that. I don't want to have that moment, right? Like we don't want to, I don't like to interrupt. I don't even like to monitor a lot of the conversations, but I feel like a lot more these days, people are not as prepared as they should be to have these conversations. And a lot of the CEOs, I mean, there's just such a proliferation, especially in the startup tech space, of like new entrepreneurs and things like that, people who feel like they know what they're doing that don't take that time to prepare, that I think that's also a challenge. And I don't know if that's a challenge that you've seen where like people are like, oh no, I'm good. I'll just go into this interview and, I'll be fine. And then you get in there and lo and behold, some like hardball question comes up and they like don't know how to answer it. And that's always, like you said, these rapid response things, they can go either way. Do you find often that it ends up being an interview, or is it usually written text that you can manage or control?
Oh, it's very rarely where you're sending a written answer. It's,
Yeah.
I'd say that's like 5%. I mean, like seriously low, unless it's someone they really want to talk to who has a really well-known like impact in the space. And if that's the only way they can talk to this
Right.
person, then maybe they'll make an exception. Maybe but normally it's an interview. Occasionally it's like a contributor article. Like I would say that's like 15 to 20% of the time, but more often than not, people want to get on the phone.
Yeah.
If it's someone that, I rarely have a client where I don't feel like I wouldn't pitch them on a story I don't think they could answer like sufficiently with like good insight, because why would I set them up to fail intentionally?
No, of
Like,
course.
just
Yeah.
like, like I remember I used to be on a swim team and like the coach just like pushed me in the water when I was about to dive and I broke my nose, right?
Oh,
Like I
wow.
hurt my nose pretty bad because I wasn't ready to do that. And they push you to do it before you're ready. So I think it's also gauging where the client is at. And also how they talk and depending on the platform, right? So some people can talk to print because it doesn't matter how you sound.
Yeah.
But other people are monotone and you're trying to teach them personality, right? It's not a bad thing. Everyone's their own person. Some people don't know how to share their personality outside of when they're out with their friends, right? Or out with their family. And so it's teaching them that. And so sometimes I'll only pitch to print and then like slowly introduce
like graduate them to the next level.
Well, to me, graduating them, which I think some people don't like, is graduating them to local TV or local radio. But really radio, because then they don't have to worry about the face, and then you move to national radio and then you move to local TV. It's just like, it's that gradual thing. And also you're building that reel so that when we're doing more breaking news stuff, you can get to some of the national stuff that you may want. But I mean, it would not make sense to take someone who does not have the right persona for TV yet and just throw them on CNBC.
Well, that's actually a really good point that you brought up, the reel. So do you find that like people request that? Like, hey, can I see your executive's reel?
No. So when we do a pitch and we do newsjacking or breaking news pitching is how we call it, we are always adding like their top previous placements in the first paragraph. And we highlight it. And like when you look at the data, the number one thing that people click on is not your company website, is not the person's bio. It's the
other things you've been in.
Well, it's like I relate it to like I live in New York City and every place in New York City says they have the best pizza. But there's like absolutely zero chance everyone does. But if Barstool Sports Guy gives it like a 9.5 or Diner Drive-Ins and Dive, you're like, maybe it's just maybe like, okay, I'll give it a shot. And this is telling people like, not only do we think they're amazing and they think they're amazing, but other outlets saw value in what they had to say.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a good point too. I think building that credibility factor is really important. What about like tips that you might have for people that haven't done a lot of the news stuff yet and they're just getting into it? Like you said, you don't want to throw anybody into the fire until they're like quite ready and ripe for that. But there's a lot of people that are trying to be seen in a very crowded space right now. And so what does getting started look like to you?
So it's really about that conversation with that person. And for me, it's a deep dive of who they are. It's not just about like, I want to know everything. I tell them like, be as TMI as you want with me. Like the more they tell me about your life and your background, your story, I can also draw more opportunities and experiences that may fit more of your comfort level. And I can also tell when someone's talking to me what they are comfortable talking about, because we throw different topics, we hear what they have to say. And then we also ask, are there areas you don't feel comfortable speaking to? Now,
Yeah.
there's some moments where the client doesn't know what they're not comfortable speaking to because
Yeah.
they would, in an ideal world, they would like to be open to everything, right? Because they want to get everywhere. I think that's, that's one thing. Sometimes if it's someone that I'm unsure with, like, I definitely suggest being open to do tier 2 and tier 3. Now,
Oh
every
yeah.
client, what the definition of that is different depending on who their audience is. As someone says, like, Good Morning America isn't for everyone because your audience may not be there. Right. So
Mhm.
it's really identifying like what that looks like. And then when you have those types of opportunities, sometimes like, when we do podcasts, we always do test episodes. Right.
Mhm.
And if it's someone that's genuinely nervous, I would want to just see like, hey, we just like there was a story that happened last month. Like, let's pretend we're doing this. What would you say? Right. And just kind of just playing role play with them of like
Yeah.
previous stories that would be good for them, just to get them out of their comfort zone and getting them used to like talking. When I used to do like radio training for hosts, and I would always call it like couch talk. Like, pretend you're on your couch talking to your friend, because like people get terrified by a mic or the
Oh
green
yeah.
computer coming up, and they forget how to talk, or they like have the glasses and I can see your screen, like all the things that you don't want in the world. And I think it's just creating that trust and vulnerability. And like in some ways, like when I started doing PR again, like where people had me doing like some stuff for myself, I think it's always a good reminder when you're doing this as a company to also put yourself back in the shoes of that person. Because
Yeah.
like, when you're preaching to other people, and it's not saying in a negative way, it's just like you're giving advice and things, but if you're not living it yourself and you're not going through the nerves again, and you're not trying to get the right lighting and the hair is just right, and I'm saying the right thing and I'm memorizing these things. I mean, I spoke at a conference last month and everyone's like, oh, you should be fine. I'm like, I'm talking in front of 3,000 people. I am definitely nervous. And these are like really important people. Oh, you got this. I mean,
Do
like,
I? Yeah.
but it's important to put yourself as, especially if you're training these people and you're teaching these people. I think it's really important that for those who are training the people, that they have experience of going through the nerves of what you're going through.
Right. Right.
You can't empathize, but you also can't give the best advice if you're not doing it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. So, like when you guys are identifying topics, going back to this, like, breaking news pitching, when you guys are identifying topics, obviously you can't respond to everything. How do you like, do you pick like 3 or 4 things that you identify that you want to respond to? Is there like a time frame in which you like stick with one like pool of topics and then you switch over? Like, how do you guys assess how many topics you're going to address in a certain period of time, or,
I
something like
mean,
that?
is it solely newsjacking or just pitching in
In
general?
general, I guess, like how long do you stick with a topic so that you can like really optimize that conversation?
I really think it's about so typically we give a client 2 to 3 options of like topics and they choose what they like. But it's really as long as a topic is really resonating with reporters. And then
Mhm.
like you might have a pitch that may become something that's working for a while, but you're updating it based on what's going on in the news. And so you're keeping it fresh, but you're not really changing topics. Other
Yeah.
times, if a topic is not resonating, which happens, like, no matter how pro you are, sometimes it's just a topic does not resonate to the level that you or the client wants, right?
Yeah.
Which happens. And so it's having that flexibility, like, okay, if we're not getting follow-ups, not getting responses from like the second follow-up, it's time to pivot.
Yeah.
Right. And so we start going into like different types of topics. And even once we're in the first follow-up, I start telling people like we should start brainstorming, so that if for some reason the second follow-up is crickets, we're
Then
moving
you
on.
can pivot quickly. Yeah.
Also, sometimes during a normal pitch process, something happens in the news. And so you're pausing in that moment to be like, okay, so we're gonna pause what we're talking about and move to this. Because sometimes you're talking about something to a specific audience, but when some news hits, they're not they're not gonna talk about, you're wasting your emails.
It's done. Yeah, it's done.
Well, it might come back later when that
Right.
topic dies down, if it's an evergreen topic, but it's tone deaf. If you're pitching like stories in London and the Queen just died, doesn't matter what beat that person's writing about, you are tone deaf.
Yeah. Well, I
Unless
I
some
I
like
I think that's
major
an
collapse
important thing.
happens.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to address, and I like to hear more from that perspective of like how can you be mindful, not even just for breaking news, right? Just for like pitching in general. I think we also have this issue with clients where They don't realize, like, if I say, hey, look, right now, maybe not the best time. There's this event going on. There's this stuff. Like, maybe we need to hold it. Like, a lot of clients are impatient. How do you manage that expectation? How do you like explain the news cycle to them?
So, I mean, usually with a lot of clients, there's different verticals that you can
Yeah.
touch. And so it's identifying. So like when we do a book is such a great example because sometimes we'll have a client who's like, I only want to be pitched to this type of audience. But the book has like diet and wellness, health, diversity and inclusion issues, like all these different issues that when you're the one who's writing it, or you're the one who's like in the bubble of your company, you live and breathe it. And sometimes you don't have the ability to like stand outside of it and be able to see all the other perspectives that
Right.
your company impacts from just the sheer work of what you're doing. And that's our job to some extent, right? So if something's big's happening in one sector, pivoting to a different audience and different set of reporters that will never write about that other topic, right? One avenue. And then it's just having like an honest conversation. Like the other day, someone wanted to have, was thinking about having a release happen on like January 2nd. I'm like, no. The January 3rd. I'm like, no. Why? Well, I mean, people are still tumbling in. Like people are technically off for most companies January 2nd. Like that would, why are we going to pitch on it just as a basic level? It's not even, it's just like unless you want to see all the out of offices in the world.
Yeah.
That day. And so I think it's just having a realistic, honest conversation of expectations of like, you want us to get you the best results. We are telling you if we move by what you're asking us to do, you're not going to get that. And if you're cool with that, understanding that you may get 0 results, like sometimes you have to like be real significant,
Right.
then cool, right? Then fine. But if you're not, I would wait a few days. And most clients put it in that perspective are open to waiting a few days. But it's also, I think there's sometimes a fear with a lot of people of people are hiring you for your expertise and your service. And sometimes people are stubborn. I'm stubborn sometimes, right? Like everyone has their own level, but it's a relationship. And I always tell when I'm working with someone, it's like, it's just a different type of relationship. We have to compromise. Like you have your priorities and you hired us because we know the news.
Yeah. Right.
And so, because everything I look at, I put myself back when I was a reporter, when I was a producer, would I even open this? Would I even be in the office? Would I even care? And so I think it's just having those honest conversations.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to remind people that they're like, we're all human. Like we're human as PR people, but also the reporters, they have a life. They like have children or, they're going to their holiday party. Or I was explaining to a client the other day, like, hey, look, I've been talking to people the last couple of weeks and they said they're all going to be out this day, but they're like, oh, but we still want to do it. And I was like, I told you. So as long as I warned you, I feel like
sometimes you'll have a client who's done a newsjacking thing, right? But then a bigger newsjacking story happened and they did the interview already in the studio and then it doesn't air and they blame you, right? And I'm like, look, I followed up till I was blue in the face. I called the guy. And like, as much as we significantly try, I can't force someone.
Yes.
Or like, even like with some of these breaking news trend pitching, I'm sure you've had people say like, it's not like, where's the backlink?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah.
Backlink conversation is a big one because unless you have research that you're sharing, unless it's like an infographic, maybe, or a product with an e-commerce writer, you're not guaranteed any backlink. It's most likely not happening. And if it is, amazing, beautiful, I'm so happy for you. But sometimes, a client will get a hit in like a top tier outlet, like the top 5. And like for us, it's like, oh my God, yes, this is solid. But they're like, this doesn't mean anything to me if there's not a backlink.
Yeah.
Right. So
I mean, that's
that conversation too for people who are going to like newsjacking or considering it is like the concept of like, is it worth doing it if there's no backlink? But the SEO, like for a lot of these really great outlets, the SEO is so amazing that it doesn't matter in terms of brand visibility, because if they're Googling a specific topic, like I used to write a lot about remote work. My articles were always like the top 3 on Google News for a while, right? Because I was talking, it's about the keywords, it's about the topic, and it's about the outlet. Right? If you're doing the right things, you're going to be in front of the right people. Now, are they technically going to go to your website? I don't know. I'm not magic, but also the outlet's never going to tell us how many people are clicking on that link.
Yeah, I always tell people we're not magicians. I know it seems like it when the right hit hits, it feels like it's magic, but yeah, you can't force anybody. We're not paying for these. I think that's like also another thing. It's like there sometimes, most of the times they understand it's earned media, but like I think there's like this miscommunication or misunderstanding of like how media works. Just because they did the interview doesn't mean they have to do anything else. Like, and that's, I mean, it sucks for us too. I think people don't realize, like, obviously we thrive on like the hit happening, right? Like I love it when I see a placement, but like also we are also disappointed when it doesn't come out, and or when like the reporter ghosts you.
Oh, we
And
have
you-
that happen too. But then sometimes like it happens because the client doesn't respond,
that's true.
right?
Yeah.
And then or they reschedule 3 times. And
Mm,
the client's like, I'm over this. And then and the client gets upset when they're not open to happening. And it's as if we did something wrong.
right.
And never with anything, I always say is like you have to put yourself in the shoes of the people that you're dealing with. Like on
Yeah.
both sides. Like if someone ghosted me 3 times, like did not show, like
Oh, I wouldn't. Yeah. Yeah. I agree
especially when
totally.
especially when you like if you put yourself in the reporter shoes, you get thousands of emails a day from people. So like the fact that like they gave you three chances and you bye.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing to understand. I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to emphasize during this conversation was readiness, like being ready and willing to speak to the media. If you want to do this kind of newsjacking or trend stories or anything that goes with something that has to be timely, you have to be available. And we always tell our clients that, and then sometimes they don't show up. And that, again, that looks bad on everybody, not just the person who didn't show up, but it also looks bad on the PR person who secured that hit. And I think that's something to remember. Like we're all part of a team. We're trying to get the best result. You got to show up.
I mean, they always say 95% of life is showing up. Like if you
Yeah.
do it, nothing's gonna happen, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry.
No, I love that. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen? We've talked about this kind of concept of newsjacking, but like, I really want to talk about what's happening in the upcoming year and how important it is to be visible and what people can do to stay visible, and even maybe how to carve out those like topics that they're interested in. So, as we're going to this year that people are calling a recession and everybody's worried, what do you think some brands or even just executives or people can do to kind of carve out those like trending ideas that they can kind of stay on top of the news?
So I think if you're dealing with like any company or you're dealing with their C-suite or specific thought leaders or emerging thought leaders, however you want to view it, um, you like I think it's really important to create a personal brand strategy for that person of identifying their pillars of areas that they feel comfortable speaking to and like what's the purpose of them speaking to like overarching topics. So for like me, when someone was doing that with me, they wanted me to focus on PR significantly. While I do talk about it and I'm here, it's not my main thing, right?
Hmm.
It's not my main thing I focus on because when you're speaking to people who are in your space, you're not speaking to the people for us who would be potentially like new clients or new people to know that we exist or that I can help. In some ways, it's just talking to friends at times, which is
Hmm.
really important and very good that other people know you exist. But you have to think about who else besides who already knows you needs to know who you are and who's your
Yeah.
current audience and who's the audience that you haven't touched and how are you reaching them. And sometimes when, once that those pillars are created and the messaging points, and it doesn't mean it's preparing you for every story or every strategy, but it's giving you a foundation so that when something does happen in the news, where everything that we're saying should be coming from this perspective or this vibe, right? So like when we do social, like I think about like even for my page, if someone looked at my page, what are the 5 things I want them to think about when they see my page?
Yeah.
Right. So like fun millennial boss, likes fashion, travels, has cute puppies, boss business leader, right? Like whatever it is for
Hmm.
you, I think that's also important to identify because the tone that you use, the stories that you pick, and how you message it is super important. But once the interview happens, like sometimes you think it would be obvious that someone would post this on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
but it isn't. Right. And so if you're trying to expand your brand visibility, like there's some things that are very basic to do that is super easy, but people just don't do because like with radio or TV, once an interview happens, then it's not guaranteed it's going to go online. It dies. It doesn't
Yeah.
go anywhere unless you do something with it. unless you take the content and you repurpose the content, right? And then when you're looking at your brand pillars, it's not just looking at, doing TV or radio or print, or identifying what areas do you feel like you don't have strengths in terms of media relations, and how can we like really amp those up for this year? Or who are the, we know that the recession is happening. We know that like people it might happen. We know that, crypto or Bitcoin is really struggling. We know that, there's some things that we know at the end of the year. We know that people are starting to think about presidential elections towards middle of next year.
Right.
There's some things that we do know that are pertinent to a client, or it's like a big legal case, like, it might be on pause now, but is going to come back. And so those things you can start preparing ahead of time, and role playing scenarios or best outcomes. Like, anytime someone goes to like the Oscar and they're nominated, they have the acceptance speech.
Yes.
They have the speech if they don't get accepted.
Their face when they don't get accepted.
That too. And I always tell people, I wish I had a poker face. It's one of the things like I really genuinely wish in life. But I think there's a lot of planning that you can do, but I think it's not just about planning the media relations, is all the other facets, like what are we trying to use these opportunities for, both company wise, but also personally as like a thought leader, that because like people don't sometimes understand that like when you focus on pushing yourself personally, it has impact on the company in a very positive way, generally, unless again, you're someone who's extremely controversial, it generally adds to the formula. So, should we be pitching this person at speaking events? Are we building the type of opportunity so that they have like awards or other things that we can really add to that narrative? Does this person post regularly so that if a reporter is looking at them for the first time, that there's something for them to have a frame of reference for if they don't have press? Because if you don't have any press, the one thing that reporter will look at is your LinkedIn. Some people don't have that. Some people still don't have that.
Yeah, they still have their like icon picture. It's not even their face. You're like,
people don't even have their title. Like, or like more than 10 followers. Like, like if you don't have any media relations hits or anything like that, like it's okay. It's never impossible, but you can do things to make it easier for people to say yes.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like,
I think sometimes people forget that we can find each other very easily, and like you should have that representation anywhere someone can Google. Like Google, I know it's not probably mental health wise good to Google yourself, but for your brand, do it for your brand.
For me, my name is very unique, so it's very easy to see my whole life. But for some people, if you have a very common name, like for Sanchez, something like that. Right? That's my best friend's name, so I'll use her name, Jennifer Sanchez. You're going to see all the pages of all these other people. And so that's a whole other problem. How do you break out of the millions of people with your name?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so funny because maybe like 5 years ago, I was the only one of me. And like, I was like, oh, I knew like one person that had my name, my original name with my maiden name. But she lived in Singapore and she was much older than me. And so I was like, there's no way. And I was like dominating the market. Now I've been, married for 10 years and like my name has changed. And then all of a sudden there's like all these other people with my name, but I'm still at the top because I've been around longer. So it's just so interesting that, how quickly you can get diluted if you don't have like a position, right? Because I'm obviously just like a PR person. It's easy to find me, Ranjini PR, you could find me. But if you don't have that kind of positioning, it's really, really, you could get lost in the shuffle real quickly.
Well, I also think about when you're looking at yourself, like, is it really reflecting the type of thing that you want people looking at when they search you? Right. Because like for a while, like you'd see like my name attached to like, my mom's stuff when I was younger, or like political stuff I've worked on that, I've worked for some interesting characters in my life. Right. And so like, well, that's fine. Sometimes it's hard to create your own footprint.
Right.
And so really taking those steps to do that.
Yeah, no, I think this is all really important. I mean, this kind of leads into, we went from like newsjacking to personal branding, which I think is they're very highly tied together. So I think it's a good conversation to have. I think we're running out of time here. So I think I want to kind of one thing I wanted to just touch on before we left is just the time that it takes to establish some kind of thought leadership. And because you mentioned expert leadership and thought leadership. And so I like people to really understand, even though you're newsjacking or whatever, breaking news pitching or talking about things as an expert, obviously one placement's not going to do it. Two placements is not going to do it. What have you found is like the sweet spot of really someone like who's actively participating in the news commentary, who has started to build some credibility and expertise and leadership? Like what does that time frame look like for some people?
I think it really depends on the person that you're dealing with. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is some clients are game to do everything. Some clients are definitely not, no matter what you tell them, because I think of it as like a ladder approach, right? And anything in life, you have to earn your way up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get moments of big breaks, right? So those are the top tier, so I think it's like a formula of like willingness to talk about relevant things, willingness to take, like medium, smaller things while because people think when you send them medium or smaller things that we're not going for the big stuff. We are always
Yeah.
going for the big stuff. Like, why would I do that to you? Like, that would make zero sense. But sometimes people don't understand that. And then also the timing, like the amount of time that they've been out there on different stories. It's not about the number of placements, because you could hit one story and then you're like blown up on
Yeah.
something for like one day, but like 6 months later you haven't had anything.
Crickets. Yeah.
You're also not in that person's inbox. They're not seeing you have your perspective or keeping you top of mind, because sometimes it's not even about the pitch of the day. Sometimes like how we put someone as like an expert, like democratic strategist, for instance, or crypto expert or whatever it is. And people, first of all, people wonder why we do that. One, no one knows who you are most of the time. Putting your name in subject line isn't going to do anything.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
Thank you.
it's never going to do anything. Even, I always use like I said, someone puts my name in the subject line, no one knows who I am most of the time, right? I mean, they
Yeah.
may know a PR person, but like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the same. And then, second of all, it helps. It makes it easy for a reporter when they're on deadline. You have to think about when someone's the laziest, right? When someone's at their laziest and they don't want to have to research, they're going to go through the email inbox search button and they're going to put crypto expert. And then they're going to look at the first people that show it. I can't tell you how many times we've had reporters come back to us and say like, hey, like, is this person free? Like sometimes a year later,
Yeah.
sometimes months later. Right. And so it's really important how you frame yourself and your expertise.
Yes. I like
The better
that.
that you do that, the more opportunities you have and the more credibility you're building. And I think it's just like, if we're starting with the large story, are you keeping on track of that story in terms of like, has your voice been out there throughout the story? So like one of our clients was coined the most quoted man in Washington, D.C. because
Wow.
we got him 700 interviews in 2 years
Wow.
for the Biden election, right? Now, at first, when I saw that political article, I wanted to die. I'm like, oh my God, they're making it sound like,
Yeah.
but like, I mean, I was glad it was Friday. I had a Guinness in front of me. I was like, this is needed.
Yeah.
But in fact, people really like seeing that, both from a reporter standpoint and from a client standpoint, because it showed persistence, right?
Yeah.
And while this person has been quoted the most, the reason they have been is because they must be giving the juice. They
Yeah.
must be insight. So it's not in. And then the third element, not to be a telenovela in response, is like, what are you bringing to the table when you're giving your perspective? Like, are you giving something that's unique? Do you have a
Right.
stance? I think sometimes a lot of clients get nervous because they think having a stance means you have to be overly controversial. No, you just have to have an actual opinion or an actual thought of consequence or insight that someone might not have thought of or
Yes.
might not have considered. So when we write a newsjacking pitch, like when it's usually extremely short, like an intro paragraph about who this person is and that they can talk to the story. And then usually, and like, and then within it, I highlighting like the 3 different areas in like a couple words. And then you give a little bit more about who they are. And then you have the 4 or 5 bullet points of like what can they add to your story that you might need.
Yeah.
You're helping them identify what type of like perspectives that this person can add. It sometimes you don't even need to have the client's full perspective, just knowing that they can give that element. So
Right.
and so when you do all those things, I think usually 6 months.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think I agree.
Answer. I know that was a long answer, but there's so many different elements to making things happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, just people just forget it is such a work in progress and nothing's immediate. Nothing's magic, even though we seem like very magical creatures.
Tell people, I wish I was psychic. If I was, I would be charging a lot more.
Oh,
You know what
yeah.
I'm saying? How many exact placements? I always tell people opportunities. That's what I say.
Yeah.
The reason
Yeah.
why I say opportunities is because, first of all, I can't guarantee when it will place. It's dependent on the opportunity, right? And then second of all, it's also up to the client to say yes.
Yes.
So I can send you all the things in the world and you'll be upset that there are no placements. But if you don't say yes to a single thing, or you don't make time, or you cancel, that's not something I can control. But what I can control is presenting opportunities. And then
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's up to you.
Yeah. One of the last conversations I had with other PR folks, we were just talking about like, we are the person that helps you connect the dots. We can bring those opportunities to you. We can't control the outcome because you have to behave a certain way. And then the reporter has to behave a certain way. And so like, there are so many variables, but there's a lot of different ways. We were talking about measurement to measure the impact and the results based on what's presented. So I totally agree with you. Thank you so much, Mary. I think this has been such a good conversation, not only on newsjacking, but just like presenting yourself as a thought leader and really kind of capitalizing on how to create those talking points that resonate with reporters and like your brand. And I think it's important to understand how all of those things fit together. So this has been such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.